Welcome back to Why We Fight. I'm your host, Justin Stam. This is just going to be a lead-in for the talks and videos and analysis that I'm bringing over from the old channel into this new channel. Like I mentioned before, we're going to have talks, we're going to have old videos, we're going to have audio outtakes taken from the Twitter X spaces, conversations, as well as the podcast that's completely onto its own. So enjoy, and we'll see you soon. What is real? How do you define what is real? And can you prove objective truth with subjective means? This is the perennial question caught in the false dialectic of the pagan schools which dominate modern philosophy and politics. This is what we'll look at today and how it affects our political landscape. Coming up. I've been keeping the content light up to this point and have purposefully labeled things as blue-collar politics for a reason. But today I'm kicking it up a notch, and this talk will tie directly into the modern political dilemmas we're facing and how to go about correcting them, at least for those of us already off the reservation of the false political paradigms we were handed. My main intended audience for this talk is the group of people that understands and has realized the parliamentary-styled form of government cannot fix itself or be fixed, and why. The secondary audience are those on the dissident right that knowingly or unknowingly are participating with a paradigmatic solution that parallels the current system, not necessarily in form, but in substance, and that their political paradigms are malleable because they are based on the principles of pagan philosophical categories of constant flux and change of the world of forms, and not rooted in the perennial, unchanging divine attributes of the Logos that come down to us. Why is that? Because they don't believe we can possibly come to understand the Logos, and that he never participates with his creation. So the duality of the world of forms is the reality, or the simulacrum. And this world of impermanence is malleable and can be molded through the definitive actions that start with a Nietzschean will to power. We're going to prove why this has been our folly in the dissident right, and why classical Catholic philosophy gives the best answer of how the participation of the one and the many occurs. The Logos with his created order, and how we order our life ethics, domestic economy, and politics around it. So, buckle up. In examining these questions, it's also unavoidable to acknowledge pop culture media and its influence on mainstream culture, and how we perceive things, how the enemy uses images to purposefully alter our perception of reality, for their advantage through programs like Operation Mockingbird. Movies like The Matrix do this in a masterful way, and I don't mean in a good way. Many on the right don't realize how seductive this film's themes are and how it's dripping with false presumptions of pagan philosophy. In it, the filmmakers pose questions that come from the ancient perennial schools, like the reality of reality, simulations of reality, as in Plato's allegory of the cave, and the impermanence of the world of flux and change, with the process of the universe constantly going through birth, stasis, degeneration, destruction, and rebirth. However, many don't realize that this foundational model actually undermines any logical reason to resist the constantly embattled state of the political right. If this particular paradigm is embraced, then you have to embrace the belief of constant change as well, and therefore have no logical reason to resist that change. Therefore, what you have is a philosophy that contradicts your values and desired outcomes and leads to a standstill, just like we see now. When one becomes a pupil of internet political sensations such as Menicus Moldbug, who seems to be a rising star with many on the so-called right wing, who espouses ideas like neo-monarchism, one should really ask, does this politic represent me? Or is he presenting yet another disposable answer as the masses begin to finally see through the BS of the false dialectic of our current system? Are figures like him playing on our ancestral subconscious by using terms like cathedral to describe the political power structure, yet never examining in depth the intricacies of the Christian imperium in which he claims to hearken the term to? In my opinion, it sounds like another attempt to manufacture the simulation of a solution rather than the solution itself. And any who have studied the methods of the globalist intelligence agencies knows that MK Ultra, specifically Operation Mockingbird, is designed to do just that, to exploit the use of images and ideas in order to subvert and alter your paradigm of reality, for the benefit of propping up a system that ensures their power structure and your clarity in perception of truth. Their entire paradigm is that absolute truth doesn't exist, at least in this world of forms, and what they make you see is what exists and is the true reality. So they use the shadow in the cave or the computer simulation or images to control your behavior and perception. Their interest is not to direct you to the truth on any given issue, or to preserve your heritage and culture in what the term patriot actually means from the Greek, but to shake you from the belief of what you see with your own two eyes and reinterpret it for you. This rejection of true reality is found directly in the Matrix, but many grew up thinking the filmmakers, the Wachowski brothers, were doing you a favor, giving you the red pill. I assure you they were not. Their rejection of the reality of reality, as it pertains to created beings, and their desire to wield a command over what they want to be reality, reaches its zenith in their real-world gender reassignment surgery. All of this is based on an embracing of the pagan philosophy that this world is partially or entirely a simulation or illusory, and not actually real, which I argue is mind poison. So what is pagan philosophy and religion exactly? Let's dive into an analysis of pagan doctrines in order to undermine the foundational principles of constantly changing modernist politics. While on the subject of The Matrix, I don't think there is a more iconic movie in modern history that's had more influence on the non-traditional political paradigms, both right and left. With metaphors like the red pill versus the blue pill, free your mind, and there is no spoon, the feeble-minded obtains a sense of entitlement by simply becoming a crusader against anything they think is wrong in the world or the Matrix, and become a champion for that defect they think others can't see, claiming they're the ones that are red-pilled. Everyone else isn't, and that they and their small group are the enlightened ones that need to wake up everyone else from their stupidity or be disposed of, because their existence remains an obstacle for the purpose of reaching the utopian outcome in the world of forms. The proverbial Tikkun Olam or Fix the World army then takes to the streets to fundamentally transform reality, not taking into account that this reality has given them the cradle of comfort in order to question and attack its very foundations, while they demand the right to do so as they contemplate their navel. As many have realized along the way, however, what they thought was correct at the outset of their adolescent journey came to be considered incorrect later on, as their epistemology grew. Shedding off that previous persona, they charge forward with this new position, only later on, again, to discover that there is even more to learn along the way. This process of becoming and the breaking down of the previously held beliefs of reality is discovered by many who stay on this path of seeking knowledge, but many never question their very body of knowledge itself, let alone how to verify what they are allowing into their hearts and minds, and if it is logically correct or not. Why? Because they don't have a proper appeal to authority in which to vet their epistemological understanding of the world. Modern philosophy has eliminated the very branch that has previously always been used to validate truth, which is metaphysics. They don't believe metaphysics exists or that it has a large impact on the world. I myself discovered this in my many years in Eastern pagan philosophy and religious practice. While in Buddhism you can discover in the writings of Sakyamuni this same dilemma of a constant state of renewal and enlightenment. In his sutras, he would often correct himself after he obtained new understandings on things, realizing what he previously taught was incorrect from the new paradigm. He went through this again and again until ultimately he said, "I have not taught Dharma or ultimate truth in my lifetime." Now, what did he mean by that? What he meant is that the path of the constant state of becoming, which can never reach its end within the world of forms or contingent substances, and therefore is impossible to do completely unless one transcends. So Buddhism and Taoism, similar to the Pythagorean school, possesses two particular methods of breaking down your perception of reality, or red-pilling you, called cultivation and practice, containing three guiding principles of precept, samadhi, and wisdom. The cultivation refers to the cultivating of the heart and mind through wisdom and the precepts of abstinations and abandonment of desires, which are considered to be illusory obstacles holding you back from liberation. Hardening yourself with such methods are meant to embolden the power of the will over the materially existing world, starting with your mind and body. This is done through samadhi, or concentration, while sitting in meditation or while in physical exercises. The practice refers to your being tested out in the world to see whether or not you have truly let go of your attachments to self-interest, while under duress, and if your mind will be affected by your heart or emotions. However, physical training is also involved to gain mental domination over the physical. For instance, while sitting or standing in meditation practice for long periods of time, your legs begin to ache, as well as your whole body after 30 minutes, and then after an hour while under this stress, the pain becomes unbearable. Yet you are not to break your concentration. Some are able to stay this way for hours, some for days or longer without eating or drinking. How is this? The power of the will over the physical pain is achieved by mentally treating this physical pain as illusory. As in the Matrix, the physical is subjugated to mind by your will. However, that's not the only way in which believers of the will of mind over the physical can take form. Many pagan schools in the past used drugs to suppress the consciousness. Others use images, but unlike images in Christianity to demonstrate virtues to aspire to, many of the modern uses of the images from mind control experts like Edward Bernays and Freud of the world seek to control for materialistic and selfish intents. They are not altruistic, wanting to free your mind, but actually subjugating you by tricking you to abandon your free will, which only comes from your main consciousness. So if the world is illusory, wouldn't it be difficult to obtain truth or experience it while here? Sakyamuni thought so, and one of his descendants in the Mahayana school took it a step further, named Bodhidharma, who established the Chen or Zen sect and said, "There is no ultimate Dharma to be obtained at all." What he furthered was a paradigm that is shared by, yet hidden, within all pagan schools, and points towards the Greek philosophical proposition referred to in the Matrix called simulacrum versus simulation. And that was this: if I obtain Dharma, or truth in this world of flux and change, then how do I know that is truth? Isn't the material process in which truth is transmitted in the world of flux and change not also subject to flux and change? Also, is not my body, and even my created Fuyan Shen, or main spirit, subject to flux and change? And so therefore, when my mind and body obtains truth, how do I know it is the truth? So Bodhidharma then said, since I cannot be sure of anything in this illusory world, then I cannot claim to have found Dharma. Therefore, there is no Dharma to teach or be taught. One must simply enlighten to one's own level, and that's it. And through the process of transmigration, through the eons, one will be lifted by the enlightened beings to their heavenly realms due to a predestined outcome or be annihilated. However, it is accepted and understood that this enlightenment is a simulation of truth and not the real unchanging truth or Fa of the universe. He later denigrated the sutras left by Sakyamuni in this effort to point out that they cannot contain the truth since this aforementioned argument, and actually forbade the reading of them in the temple since they can't be trusted. So no reading since no Dharma is definitive. Well, this was not accepted by the traditional Theravada or Mahayana schools, and the Chen sect was immediately considered apostate for centuries and suppressed. But did Bodhidharma have a point within the context of this pagan school? Actually, he had a very good point, as cold as the worldview is. So back to the question of what is real and how to verify it. Within the arguments of the modernist political talking heads like Moldbug, one finds a gaping hole in his argumentation for revolutionary politics as a way to fix the cathedral or replace it. He leaves out the possibility of an entire history of the Catholic Imperium, or true Western monarchism, that lasted in one form or another for 1,500 years. In addition, he not only doesn't resist this state of flux and change in values and reality itself, but embraces it, leading to the complete surrender to the inevitable collapse and replacement of entire cultures and civilization itself. The typical, I don't discount anything mentality. But no matter how he describes his arguments based on the inevitable change of politics, he is only describing everything from within the context of what is a presupposition of the necessity of change without proving the necessity of change itself, or the paradigm of the illusory image of change, spoken about in the Matrix as simulation. The problem is most don't question this presupposition, nor do they even leave the world of forms looking to God, when that is the very place they should begin their argumentation for man's origin and purpose, or teleos. What is the purpose of creation, and where do we all end up in this eschatological model of the paradigm of random acts of events? If annihilation, then what does it matter what we do here? What do I mean by that? Well, let's map out exactly what the pagan model of the universe looks like and juxtapose that to the Catholic model. Then deduce which one has the least amount of logical contradictions regarding the permanence or impermanence of the materially existing world that affects our political worldview and purpose. This will be my argumentation against pagan philosophy that gives birth to modernist politics. In my studies, I came to find that not just Buddhism and Taoism, but also the esoteric, unorthodox pagan schools, what the Chinese call the Qi-Men schools, all believe to varying degrees this model of the universe with little deviation. So the world and everything in it is made up of 5 elements you'll see on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. However, there are smaller elements that make up more dense substances that can pass through the larger particles. Yet again, there are even smaller particles that are even more dense than the previous level or dimension. This goes further and further until one reaches what they believe is the most dense primordial substance, or essence, they call primordial water. This is what they believe the general divine essence, or the great Tao, the Fa, or ether, is made up of, absolute stillness without change. Now, from this eternal Tao, eventually sentient beings began to form randomly. However, over the course of the eons, some formed groups and then opposed the divine principles and other beings, as you'll see below the line under Tao, Fa, and Ether. Because of this behavior, they were no longer permitted to exist in such a pure realm, and so the other beings should have, according to the standards of the Great Law, be reassimilated back into the Tao. But out of their compassionate nature, they formed a new environment for these fallen beings to exist, called the world of forms. Now, once in the world of forms, they are cut off from all previous existence and knowledge, and so start off as a blank slate. Yet, over the course of time, one is expected to enlighten on how to escape this process of transmigration while subjugated to birth, stasis, degeneration, destruction, and rebirth. Being subject to the changing and decaying cycles of matter, one inevitably will accumulate karma while at that level. So in the next life, will fall again. This process repeats itself again and again until falling into what is called the three realms, or the world of man, the lowest level. So how, in this state of flux and change, does one escape the illusory world? In addition, and as indicated in the model here, the entire universe is also subject to flux and change. And so, not only is the process of enlightenment and paying off karma through suffering a foregone conclusion, but to make things worse, since the universe is going through birth, stasis, degeneration, and destruction, you actually have a limited amount of time to escape before its destruction. That's the dilemma. Now, according to most of the Buddha schools and Tao schools, any being that has fallen into this world of forms has never escaped or been liberated, but has simply gone through other levels within the universal world of forms, like Mount Semaru or the Saha Paradise. But at the end of the cycle of the universe, what they call the Dharma ending period, everything that doesn't escape the world of forms in the universe will be annihilated and reassimilated back into the Tao. So who escapes this destruction? Why don't the beings that form this illusory world that act as demiurge characters help these beings? Why? Because those beings are of forms themselves, and according to the pagan schools, that which is of form is lesser than that which is formless. When one takes a form of any sort, they are already separated from the eternal Tao that is formless, and they were formed out of, therefore lower, and not able to solve the fundamental question themselves. Being helpless and not able to enter the world of forms to help, lest they be subjugated to the process of flux and change, they remain silent and motionless. So here's my point. The eventual outcome of this model means you were formed as an accident and not a willful act of a creator with personhood. Since they profess the idea that personhood is a type of form, therefore lower than formlessness, and therefore the first cause in the general divine essence in all beings without personhood. And because you were accidentally formed, you will be assimilated back into this Tao, or ether, losing all personhood and individuality, just like the first cause, general divine essence, exists. All so-called gods, Buddhas, Taos, humans, saints, criminals, all face the same eschatological problem in this model: complete annihilation. So the question is, why be good? Why pursue virtue? If the reward for the criminal and the saint is the same, complete annihilation, why do anything other than indulge in the desires? Truly a terrifying and nihilistic worldview that gives birth to nihilistic ethics and politics. One cannot and does not pursue good with this paradigm, but uses the mask of virtue to seek power by all means while trapped in this cave of illusions. In addition, what does it matter if your so-called enemy is winning or holds the scepter of power? If all power wanes and the pagan right-wing dissident clings to the glory of the European age with the esoteric model we have seen, then you can't reverse the wheel of change, and the power that now rules is the inevitable outcome. So why fight it? If power is what you seek, and degeneracy is no different than virtue in this duality, then the logical conclusion is to join them and participate with this power structure that everyone so clearly desires. The only other solution is to abandon this universal model that presupposes an inevitable decay, because it doesn't believe we can participate with the eternally unchanging, which is God Himself, as a person that actually does enter his own creation to solve the fundamental issue of the fallen state. Enlightenment comes to you, not the other way around, and it comes in the form of a person. Now, the pagan schools cannot solve this philosophical dilemma. They call the third man argument as the objective perfect form of the model of man, and what the Simulacrum tries to portray, because they don't understand as Catholicism teaches. The perfect form of man resides in the mind of the Logos as an exemplar from all eternity, and that you can't model another analog of that form, which is other men, in order to be lifted up, since they themselves are subject to the fall as well. It's like the blind leading the blind. You must model the model itself, and that which gave birth to the exemplar. He manifested by taking on human form. As a former Pythagorean and Platonist, this is the same conclusion that St. Justin Martyr came to when he became Catholic. The entire pagan eternal dialectic collapsed as a temporary one that is solved with Christ. And this is how. The Catholic model of the universe is much like the political model in that it is simpler and longer lasting. As the Buddhist school says, a great way is a simple way, leaving the lower level things to be more complicated and ending in confusion. I think that's pretty wise. Now, the Catholic model is quite different and synergistic, and the fallen state is a temporary one. And so our flesh is not an eternal dialectic tension with the Spirit and God, but is temporary. And the most important part is that the individual is never annihilated and will always exist. Now that leads to an issue of how what you do carries with you for eternity. Regardless, the answer of the participation between the one and the many is congruent. Your starting point is not a random and accidental causality, but a purposeful act by a person with will, God being that person. In addition, it answers not only how God interacts with His own creation, but also how you interact with Him and retain your free will to do so, and reject that this world is not completely illusory, but only a temporary place, but still part of the reality. However, part of the equation of existence, leading to a congruent worldview, is removing the dialectic tension that paganism proposes as it collapses under the model of proper Christology in Catholic philosophy. And this is how, and you'll see how the use of the word image is properly used in the real-world application, unlike the pagan use of the simulacrum, which is most often associated with an unrealized ideal. Now, if you look at your image, you can see that before the created realm of angels and men was God from all eternity. He is of a triadic nature, indicated as the first, second, and third person of the Godhead, with the Father being the arche of the Godhead, the Son being the eternally begotten icon or image of the Father, existing from all eternity, and the Holy Ghost, who is an icon or image of the Father and the Son from all eternity as well. Three persons with one shared nature, making one God with a specifically separate divine essence from all creation. These are His intra-operations. In His extra-operations, He made the created heavens and the 9 choirs of angels with full knowledge. Some chose rebellion and were cast down out of heaven into a newly formed abode called hell. Soon after, he created the materially existing world as we know it, of man for man, or the created realm. So too he was tested to obey of his own free will or rebel. He chose rebellion and so fell. But how did he fall? Catholic theology teaches that man's nature didn't fall. His nature, made in the image of God as an icon of God, is still good. What he lost is his likeness, or the ability to act virtuous like God. How? The three persons of the Godhead are distinct persons and co-indwell within each other in a process the Greeks called perichoresis. The Father is the arche of the Godhead. His chief attribute is Creator. The Son's chief attribute is Redeemer. And the Holy Ghost is Sanctifier. They each exist substantially, but formally co-indwell. For instance, when you see the Son, you see the Father and the Holy Ghost as well. Since God is the source of all goodness, and being in union with Him causes you to act like Him or take on His likeness, then what was lost was the withdrawal of a particular necessary attribute that causes you to act like Him, which is sanctifying grace. Since the Holy Ghost's chief attribute is sanctifier, then what was removed was the presence of the Holy Ghost with mankind. So who interacted with Adam before and after the fall? Since even Christ said no one interacts with the Father except through me, then one can conclude that it was God the Son. As the person of the Holy Ghost was withdrawn by order of the King of the created heavens himself, it was taken upon himself as Redeemer to govern all things until his physical arrival in his human nature, and bring the process of restoration of what man lost at the fall, which was the likeness to him and ultimately an entrance to the created heavens in the eschaton. Now, if you look at the image, you can see clearly the separation between the uncreated and created heavens. This brings up the question of the pagan presupposition that God cannot enter into time and space, meaning his own creation, without being subject to the fall. However, as we see in the process of perichoresis, the Father does enter time and space, but only formally. He substantially remains in the uncreated realm, and rather acts through the second person of the Godhead, God the Son, who governs with absolute authority in the created order. Since the Son is also God, with all the same divinity yet a separate personhood, then the chain of causal connection to the Father from angels and mankind is not broken. We are in a constant connection with Him, but not in full intended communion until the eschaton. So how do fallen contingent creatures escape the world of flux and change in the Catholic model? Well, first and foremost, we profess this flux and change is not the eternal nature of the universe, but a temporary one, which will meet its resolution upon Christ's arrival. It is not, on any accord of their own, other created beings like fallen angels, or self-enlightenment and abandonment. Since we are contingent beings, and all goodness, virtues, graces, and logic come from the mind of the Logos, then how we receive these attributes in which he fully resides is in direct relation to how we cultivate the virtues towards his likeness, causing us to receive his sanctifying grace. So you can see in this model the exposure of the weakness of paganism and the culture that it creates. The avoidance of virtue is from the disbelief in it, leading to a disbelief in punishment from sin. Ultimately, it leads to the exact denial of reality we already covered that permeates pagan and modern philosophy. Even if one doesn't believe in God per se, one can see the more congruent worldview that grows from a unified community that practices a life of virtue based on eternal principles rather than the conflation of vice and virtue. It is also congruent with the life of purpose. If your life was a willful act of a divine being with personhood and will, rather than an accidental existence from a general impersonal divine essence leading to annihilation at the end of the ages, Then clearly, one sees the juxtaposition of a life of a person versus a life of nihilism. This shocking difference in worldviews is what changed my mind on not just who God is and who I am, but how I view logic and the Logos, how I participate with Him, and how He guides us to participate with each other through Him, as the appeal to authority on virtue, and not a fraternal understanding among men. This is Catholic politics and why it lasted so long. Not because of the administrator of the politic itself, a king, but because of the perennial virtuous ingredients of the politics. In conclusion, we can clearly see that the proposal from the Matrix that the red pill will cause you to reject the world as real and embrace the idea that what you do here is only a simulation and is not eternal but a false presupposition. This world is real and part of the equation, but it is not our eventual outcome. How we meet the eventual outcome is determined by what we do here now and with each other. So reject the revolutionary politics based in paganism, including Masonic parliamentary-style government, to solve the problems of paganism itself. A broken thing cannot correct itself. Only that which is based in eternal truths can. Until next time, remember why we fight.